The simple fact is that we, as members of the minority, requested the right to offer an alternative to the proposal of the majority. That's not an unusual event on the floor of the Senate. In fact, it is the purpose of the Senate to debate different approaches. What we requested as an alternative was very simple, straightforward language. Let me read it again. It simply stated that it is the sense of the Congress that the Congress should not take any action that will endanger the United States military forces in the field, including the elimination or reduction of funds for troops in the field, as such action with respect to funding would undermine the safety or harm their effectiveness in pursuing their assigned missions. All this language says is that whether you agree with the President or whether you disagree with the President, whether you support a commitment of more troops or you don't support a commitment of more troops, once those troops are on the ground in the fight, we're going to give them the financial support, the logistical support, the equipment that they need in order to protect themselves and pursue their mission effectively. You don't have to support the President to support this language. It's not language which is designed to say the President's right or the President's wrong. It's simply language which is designed to say that an American soldier deserves the support of the Congress of the United States. That's an elementary responsibility of this body. And the fact that the Democratic leadership will not allow us to vote on this simple statement of support for American troops is a transgression on the purposes of the Senate, which is to express ourselves relative to the actions of our soldiers in the field and how we will support them. It is literally impossible to address the debate on Iraq without addressing the most fundamental issue, which is whether or not our troops are going to be supported when they are asked to defend us in the field. The idea that you can decouple the support for the troops from the issue of policy is absurd on its face. And the position of the Democratic leadership that you should not address the issue of supporting the troops when you address the issue of whether the tactics being pursued by the military commanders in the field are correct, which doesn't happen to be the responsibility of the Congress, that's the responsibility of the commanders, is by nature inconceivable, inconsistent, and simply not defensible. In fact, it's so absurd on its face that I would simply quote the National Commander of the American Legion, Mr. Paul Morin, who says, "We will not separate the war from the warrior." That's what this is about. Whether or not the Democratic leadership takes the truly indefensible position that in a debate on the issue of Iraq, you do not discuss the support for the person who you're asking to go out and defend this nation. What this really comes down to is very simple. This resolution would have received broad, bipartisan support in this Senate. That's because there are very few people in this Senate, I would hope virtually none, who don't believe that our obligation as a Senate, as a legislative body which funds the military, that our obligation is to give the soldiers in the field what they need in order to defend themselves and carry out their mission. And so rather than have a vote on our amendment, which would have received a large majority in this body, much larger than the proposal put forward as their proposal, they decided not to have a vote at all, and then they claimed that we were responsible for slowing the process. How inconsistent and indefensible is that statement? I don't have the votes, therefore I will not allow a vote to happen. But it's your fault that I'm not allowing the vote to happen. Really. That only makes sense if you happen to be a true partisan and believe that this debate should be a partisan debate. Somehow, my language has been described as partisan. And the other language has been described as bipartisan. But the other language has fewer votes than my language has. No, this is not true. This is simply a fact that the other side of the aisle does not wish to put their membership in a position of voting for a simple resolution that calls for the support of our troops. That's an unfortunate statement on where the Democratic Party is today relative to support for the efforts of soldiers in the field. It's hard for me to conceive that there are folks within the community of interest in Washington who feel so strongly about their dislike for the president or his policies that they are unwilling to go on record in support of the soldier who is fighting for us on the streets of Baghdad. But that is the essence of the problem here. That is why we are not going to have a vote in the Senate. It is not that the Republican membership has in some way stalled this process. The Republican leader has gone out of his way. He has gone well beyond what many of us in our party feel maybe we should have done in trying to be accommodating to the insistence of the Democratic leadership that there be no opposition to the one item that they want to bring to the floor. In my experience here in the Senate, when you bring something as controversial to the floor as the discussion of how we pursue a war and a war policy, there are going to be a lot of amendments. But the Senate leadership under the Democratic leader has said no. No, not only will there not be a lot of amendments, there will only be one amendment from our side, and then we on the Democratic side will pick the amendment on the Republican side that you can offer, and we'll let you offer that, but nothing else. Nothing else. The Republican leader, in an attempt to be responsive, said, okay, if there are only going to be two amendments, we'll pick the amendment, and the amendment will simply say that whether you support the president, whether you support his policies, at least you can say you support the troops, the soldier who's asked to go out and protect America and walk the streets of Baghdad. But that was a bridge too far for the Democratic leader, a bridge too far for the Democratic membership, because they didn't want to take that vote, even though that would have been a bipartisan vote and would have received significantly more votes than the Democratic proposal. So I don't think there should be any confusion here about why this procedure is why we aren't having a vote. We're not having a vote because more people would vote for my amendment than would vote for their amendment. And they don't want to embarrass their membership by asking them to vote for my amendment, by having to have them vote for my amendment, even though it is so. There is nothing controversial about it unless you consider supporting troops in the field, giving them what they need to fight and defend themselves, to be controversial. It's an ironic situation, and I want to thank the Republican leader for having offered me the opportunity to bring this amendment forward and for making it fairly clear that we as a membership were willing to be reasonable and that we only ask for a vote on something that we think is important while they ask for a vote on something that they think is important.